Greetings, David Jackson here. Welcome to my field office. As with most photographers, the backs of our cars are indeed our field office and where we do an awful lot of our work. I've been flying the Evolve 2 for about a year and a half, got over 8,000 minutes of flight time, and traveled all over the United States with it and in a little bit overseas. It has become the bird of choice for me. One of the reasons that I like this drone, one of the many, is that it has interchangeable lenses, giving you all kinds of photographic creative opportunities. There are now 5 lenses that are supported by the XDynamics team that work with the Evolve 2. First up, the Olympus 12mm, the widest angle lens in the Evolve 2 lens arsenal. Angle of view 84 degrees, the full frame equivalent 24 millimeters, and a filter size of 46. The Panasonic Leica 15mm is the newest addition to the Evolve 2 arsenal of lenses. It's got an angle of view of 72 millimeters, a full frame equivalent of 30, and a filter size of 46 millimeters. The Olympus 17mm comes with the Evolve 2 as a standard lens. Its angle of view is 65, the full frame equivalent of 34 millimeters, and a filter size of 46. The Olympus 25mm is an interesting addition to the Evolve 2 arsenal of lenses because it's got a full frame equivalent of 50 millimeters, with its angle of view of 47 degrees and the filter size of 46 millimeters. Lastly, the small telephoto. The Olympus 45mm. It's got an angle of view of 27 degrees. The full frame equivalent is 90 millimeters. The filter size is 37 millimeters, which makes it different from all the other lenses in the Evolve 2 arsenal. Each of these brings certain opportunities for creative control when shooting either stills or video. So let's take a look at this first picture here. This is nearby here in Park City, Utah, and this was shot with the 17mm. It's obviously a very wide shot, and the mountains in the distance are not as prominent a player in this picture. The bridge down on the bottom is very much a part of the composition, and the idea here is that the river would lead you to the snow-capped mountains in the distance. If we go to the next picture, this is shot with a 45mm. And as you can see, now the mountains are much more dominant in this picture. In order to get this picture compared to the wide shot with a 17, I had to back the Evolve 2 up about 1,000 feet to include both the bridge and the mountains in this shot. But you can see that the mountains are much more dominant. They're a much bigger player than they were with the wide angle lens. This is the same scene, shot with the 15mm this time. And I'm still trying to find that banger sunset at this location. Now we go to the next shot. This was shot with a 25mm. This is dusk. The sun has been down for a few minutes. The light is really fading. And I'm showing you this because if you zoom in on this, you'll see this thing is really fuzzy. It's terrible. It is a big mistake. And the reason is I didn't give the shutter speed and the ISO enough respect when I was shooting. So remember we were talking a little bit ago about angle of view? Well, the tighter your angle of view is, the more difficult it is to get that image to be sharp. And so you have to bump that shutter speed up. In this case, I was negligent. I only shot it at 1/25 of a second. It needed to be closer to 1/400th of a second in order to freeze this action. And one of the advantages of a wide angle lens can do for you is that it can forgive you to some degree when you're not really shooting with all that fast of a shutter speed. You can get away with it. You can get away with nighttime shots, dusk shots, city shots with a slow shutter speed, but it's got to have a wide angle lens and it's got to be really calm. Continuing on. In the next picture, this image of the lighthouse here was shot in the San Juan Islands. I put the 25mm on here because I wanted to draw some of the islands in the background and the dramatic skies into a more prominent role in this picture. If we go to the next picture, this is the same location, but now I've got a 17mm lens on here. The foreground becomes a much bigger player in this picture. The background is less dominant. This image I'm sharing with you because it was a deliberate move on my part before I even took off to throw the 45mm lens on there. I knew right away that I didn't want to get in this balloon pilot's way and create some sort of aviation chaos. I knew I needed to give him plenty of space, not trying to make him nervous or anxious. There was some wacky drone guy trying to get up close and personal to his balloon. So the other thing that this offered by putting that lens on there is it compressed the balloon up against the mountains, and it made the mountains a very dominant part of this scene. This is an example of using the magnification of a telephoto lens so that you can back off from your subject a little bit and maybe give your subject some space. In this next picture, this was the first time I shot with the 45mm, and I stumbled across a large herd of elk. And you can barely see them in the bottom of the picture, and I'll explain that in a second. And they appeared not to care about the presence of the Evolve 2. I sat there for a while, and then I got to thinking that maybe I'd done enough, and I don't want to disturb these animals. I got it back home and looked at all the pictures, and it was very obvious to me that they had no idea I was there, or they didn't demonstrate that they were at all concerned with having a drone nearby. What I should have done is waited there until the sun shined on the elk and made this a much better picture. Right now, the elk are in the mud and you can barely tell they're there. Here's another example of a telephoto shot. This happens to be two images stitched together into a small panorama. What the 45mm telephoto lens did here is it compressed the state capitol up against the downtown office buildings. Those buildings are nearly a mile apart. And then it also made the mountains in the distance a much more prominent player in this picture. So now into wide angle shots. This was shot with a 17mm. This is Shiprock in northern New Mexico. And the wide angle characteristics of this lens brings the foreground into a more prominent role. And off into the distance, you see this ancient volcano stack. Same kind of idea here. Foreground playing a big role. The mountains in the distance aren't as dominant. They're not as big in the picture. This is up in the Uinta Mountains in eastern Utah. The river is winding its way through this frost-covered valley and hopefully drawing your eye up to the distant mountain. The Evolve 2 offers you the opportunity to use either autofocus or manual focus. I'm a manual focus all the time guy. I put the bird up. I am seldom closer to my subject than 50, 60 feet. So I feel comfortable in setting my focus just inside infinity mark and getting my aperture down somewhere in the middle f-stop range, f4, f5, f5.6. I will share with you some lens reports in the comments section below, and you can click on them and read them for yourself. But those reports detail that the middle range of aperture settings is really where you want to be in terms of edge-to-edge sharpness for stills and video. f4, f5.6, f6, somewhere in there, you're going to get your best results. So when I'm shooting stills, I try to adjust my ISO and shutter speed to maintain my aperture settings somewhere in that small middle range. When I'm shooting video, I got to get my shutter speed to match up to double the frame rate that I've selected, but then I still try to reach that middle range of f4, f5, f6, somewhere in there for my aperture setting. And sometimes that's tough to achieve, and you need to employ the use of some neutral density filters to get there. Pay close attention to the autofocus manual focus switch on the Leica 15. In order for it to work with the E2, this has to be in the autofocus mode. This is the Olympus 17mm. It has an automatic manual focus clutch. If you move the clutch towards the rear of the lens, closest to the camera, it's in manual focus only mode, and you can't adjust the focus from the Evolve 2 ground station. If you move the clutch forward, now it's in the automatic focus mode, and you can adjust the focus using the Evolve 2 ground station. It's time to wrap this up. I hope this video has provided you with some insight and clarity on how you can use interchangeable lenses in your creative pursuit of aerial photography. It's made a big difference in my work. The E2 is unique in this category. Its compact size and the ability to support 5 different lenses is really a unique opportunity in terms of photographic creative options. Thanks for watching. All the best. Fly safe.